Here we go. Good morning. Welcome to the latest episode of the Red Pilled Fiction Factory. Today we have another Englishman. He's from up north, he says, which means the north of the UK. His name is John Davies, and he's written an outstanding little novella called Muscle. Hi, John. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Richard. Thanks for having me on.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure, no, not least because I thoroughly enjoyed your novella, and
Thank you.
love to know how come you knew so much about the subject matter, which is basically a one week in one man's life in a very bare, raw context, sort of narrative, which grips from the first few pages and doesn't let go to the about page 100 where it ends.
Thank you.
But before we get into all that, where are you? Give us a bit about your background. You're British, we know that. You're from up north.
Yeah.
There's a bit more in your blurb. It says you're former military intelligence, a casual judo player, and a poet. Go on.
Yeah. Perhaps quite contradictory interests in many ways. So I'm originally from Cambridgeshire. So I was brought up in Peterborough, a city down there that has the dubious distinction of being voted as one of the worst places to live in the UK for I think the last sort of 4 years or something like that.
Yeah.
A little bit unfair though, I think, in my opinion. I've got a lot of fond memories there. Joined the army late. So I think I was about 27 when I joined up, and I went to the intelligence corps. I was there for 12 and a half years in the intelligence corps, where I sort of specialised in human intelligence collection. So that's debriefing, interrogation, some source handling, things like that. Deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan, and had a good old, a decent sort of career there. Really good experience.
And that would bring you more or less up to the present day, would it? Or has it been how old you are?
I've been in civilian street now for the last 10 years. So I left the military in 2013.
Okay.
And then sort of moved into, I suppose, like a more normal employment, I suppose, working in training.
Okay. The book is full of violence, but it's not the military style. It's more the old-fashioned fists and stuff.
Yeah.
Have you been tempted to draw on your military experiences and knowledge in another context?
There's a couple of ideas that are kind of knocking around at the moment, I think, that will perhaps be a bit of a mixture between the military context and perhaps something like Muscle, that kind of crime, urban crime type drama. But I've not really been tempted to write a straight military type fiction book. I don't think that's quite where my sort of skill set is as such. I mean, you did that exceedingly well with Lost Causes.
Thank you.
But I don't think that's quite where my skill set lies. I don't think I could match something like that. So I'll stick to my lane in kind of urban crime type dramas. Yeah,
well, I think you may have found your niche on your first outing, because there's something very natural and organic and fluid about what you do write about.
Oh, thank you.
Where did the inspiration to write a book come from? As you say, you've got a contradictory set of interests. We don't normally expect ex-army types to be writing novels. What happened along the way?
I think I've always written since being young, really. My mum was very much into reading. She always had books out of the library, so I've always read from an early age, and I think from that time I've always appreciated and enjoyed storytelling. So certainly writing the stories at school, drawing my own comic books, things like that. And being a published author has always been a bit of an ambition of mine. I wrote stories for myself throughout being in the army and so on. So there's various half-finished novels, short stories, poems, and so on that are stuck on various hard drives in places. So being a writer probably came before joining the army.
Right. And the army would have helped feed your knowledge base and experiences.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You do meet some interesting people and have some interesting experiences.
Especially if you're interrogating them.
Yeah, yeah. You hear some stories. You know, you definitely see some. You see and hear things. Perhaps the worst of people at times. You know, and I don't think I'm unique in that. I suppose anybody that's in the police or say the fire service, you know, they all experience some of the sort of darker sides of life as such, but there's often a lot of humor there as well, and just a lot of different varied people that you meet that just all, if you're into writing, you know, they feed into that that experience, don't they?
Now, it's a non-political book in the strict sense, but you do get a sense of life, as I think Ayn Rand used to call it, a sense of life coming through, which is very red pill based and
Yeah.
sort of there's not many liberal sympathies involved.
No.
Where would you describe yourself on the political spectrum in that sense?
I'm not sure now, because I think I suppose it's that old argument in terms of you have people who were perhaps at one point on the left said that, well, I've stayed where I am. Everybody else has shifted directly, you know, the other way.
Yeah.
I probably describe myself as somewhere centre right, maybe something along those lines, perhaps. Yeah. Overall. Yeah. If I was to try and pin it down, but I think I probably do have some liberal views in some ways. I'm not so much sure that you can maybe make a clear distinction anymore between left and right. Simply, I think it's very much more to do with now how much personal freedom you believe in, how much government overreach you believe in, those kind of questions. I think how much personal responsibility you believe in, how much accountability. I think it comes down to those kind of questions now.
It probably always has, but it's something that's been obfuscated in recent decades, so that we've lost track of what's right and wrong, and it all comes down to what colour you vote for on a piece of paper every decade, and that's nonsense in itself.
Yeah. And the absolute loyalty, you know, this kind of slavish loyalty that people have to certain political parties now, rather than the actual ideas and the policies themselves.
Yeah, I think we're all finding our way out of that muddle. Here I am, in recent news, I can hardly believe I'm cheering the election results with George Galloway winning and Putin. I mean, if you told me that 20 or 30 years ago, I would have shot, thought you were mad. An ex-KGB officer, and I was the sort of type that would have gone to fight and die to kill someone like that. But here we are, 30 years later, and it's all become. I think, well, hopefully this is all part of the process where we've come to terms with the fact that the last half a century or so has been a complete muddle, and find a way out of it.
It's quite interesting, isn't it? And I think, you touch on that in your book. It's that question of where did it all go wrong?
Yeah.
When did it change? When did these things start to shift? And trying to put your finger on it and trying to unpick where we are now and look back at that point, it's quite difficult.
Certainly is. Hopefully time will help in that respect. I'm sure it will, actually. I'm certain we're on a kind of roller coaster, and we're just getting to the top of the beginning of the first drop. But we haven't quite gone over the edge yet, but when we do, it's going to be very exciting. And interesting for everyone. So you write alongside a normal job?
Yes.
You're not full-timer? Yeah.
No, not full time.
Do you have family commitments and stuff, or do you?
Yes, I've got a teenage son, so obviously you're busy there, being an engaged and sort of present father as such. So that's always good.
And let's get on to the novella itself. Now, Frankie is the main character. There are only 4 characters really that count in the book. Frankie's mate Stephen, a bad guy called Warren, and the Frankie's wife. And although it's a short, action-packed ride of 100 pages, you manage to get in all kinds of stuff in there, including a very good sex scene, I might say. And and some fighting, but also the build up to it. It's all about 1 week in this guy's life, and he's been challenged. Basically, he's the old pack leader, if you like, the old lion, who's now facing a slightly younger rival, and it's the age-old story of who's going to prevail as the time comes for him to step down, or has he still got it? And it's terrific in that sense. It really draws on all the themes that invokes: confidence, strength, or women, and appeal to them. And I don't know where you got all the material and condensed it so cleverly. But give us the story in your. The blurb says, "One fight, anything goes, everything to lose." Everything Frankie Collins has in life depends on his ability to fight. So when he's drawn into a feud with a violent gangster, he decides to settle things the old-fashioned way, with a one-on-one street fight. But as the day of reckoning approaches and the pressure takes its toll, Frankie realizes that the real fight isn't with the gangster, but with himself. So would you give us your synopsis of the novel and how it develops, please?
Yeah, so I think you've perfectly kind of captured it in what you've just said there. So the story is about the main character's a guy called Frankie Collins, who's a doorman and who runs a security firm, and he's become involved in a protracted feud with a local gangster called Warren Kelly. The story drops you in just at the kind of point where the feud's just started to peak with a drive-by shooting, and in order to stop this and draw a line under it, Frankie challenges Warren to a straightener, which is like a one-on-one street fight, no rules, and it's kind of, right, we'll do this, that's the end of the feud, done. The fight is set for a week in advance, and we then follow Frankie through those 7 days as he prepares mentally and physically for that fight, and all the challenges that start to, as the pressure starts to come in and start to weigh in on him, we start to see how he reacts and how those kind of decisions that he makes have an impact on his life going forward.
To clarify, for the audience, I checked this before we started recording, but you have never been a bouncer. Well, you may have been a bouncer part-time or something, I don't know, but you're not a bouncer, you're not in this kind of world. It's something else that you come to learn about and understand at a distance.
Yeah. So I've never been a bouncer. I've known people in that sphere, if you like, in that kind of world, and I've known people who are on the kind of peripheries of some of the things that I describe in Muscle. Muscle is very much it is a work of fiction, so Frankie's not directly based on anybody. The events that happen didn't directly take place, but events like that have happened. Yeah. I've either been a part of those things or I've been made aware of similar sort of events. So it is a work of fiction, but it's drawing upon personal experiences and personal friendships and associates that I've sort of known or known of.
I have to say, and the audience should be made well aware of this, I find that amazing, because the way you write about the world Frankie inhabits is so convincing that throughout the book I took it absolutely as a foregone conclusion that you had that was your world.
Well, thank you.
A bit like Steve Stark, who we interviewed the other day, he has worked doors all his life.
Yes.
And I just took it for granted that you were another ruffian that obviously not. Strange indeed.
Well, same hairstyle, as I said. So we've got the same barber.
And you both write very good action scenes. So there we are. Maybe
thank you.
Something in it. Now I'm going to read a few extracts in the next in the remaining time. The first one is Frankie's training. There are two that come from because basically the challenge is laid down. The gauntlet is thrown at his feet at the beginning of the book. And within 20 pages, the story starts to build towards the conclusion. And the conclusion is going to be the big fight. And so we have Frankie training, but also the doubts and hesitations that go through his brain as he knows he's going to face a massive challenge at the end of the week. Here he is planning the fight, if you like, in his head long before it actually takes place. Frankie's plan was to keep the pressure on. He would hit Warren early, hit him hard and fast, keep going for the jaw, keep going for the chin, keep going for the knockout. If he couldn't get that, then he'd do as much damage as he could to Warren's face. He'd break his nose and make it hard for him to breathe. He'd cut his eyebrows and blind him with his own blood. He'd hammer him with body shots and go for his ribs where no muscles could grow to wind him, to break those fragile bones and drive the splintered edges into his lungs until every breath he took felt like he was inhaling broken glass. Warren might have the size and he might have the training, but he didn't have what Frankie had. So, you know, just a superb piece of writing there.
Thank you.
I'm very envious. And then he goes to the gym. And again, I just love the way you, simple scene in a gym. Most people would just describe it as smelling of sweat and whatever. Here we are. Most of the equipment was old and shabby, but Frankie preferred it to the polished chrome and bland sterility of most chain gyms. He liked the atmosphere. He liked the smell of the place. He liked the history held in its walls, the stories of struggle and hardship, of victory and defeat, of facing and overcoming weakness. It reminded him of the first gyms and boxing clubs that his dad had taken to him all those years ago. So are you a boxer at least? You train in boxing?
I've done some more of the kind of fitness type boxing training with lads in the army who were boxers. So right. I've never competed in the gym myself, but I've always trained, and I think right. You know, being in the army as well, you have to train to keep yourself fit, and you meet other lads that are also into training. So there is that experience of it. I did do some judo for a while. I was a casual sort of judo player until injuries started to get in the way a little bit, and it was a case of something's got to give, and it's probably going to be me if I carry on doing it this way.
Know the feeling.
Yeah. So for all it's called the gentle art, judo is far from gentle when you're fighting competitively or in a competitive club. And I think I tried to draw those experiences in, that kind of the pleasure of going to some of these older school gyms and working hard, and that hard work that's there, and you know, training with older, more experienced trainers who've been through those struggles themselves. You know, it's a completely different experience to say just going to a commercial gym and, you know, standing on these really high tech machines and so on and getting that workout. And there's something, it goes beyond, I think, without wanting to sound too kind of out there, but it goes beyond just the physical then, I think. And it, you know, it taps into something that's quite character building.
Yeah, primordial, and definitely. And I think that's being rediscovered these days by I think it skipped a few generations. My generation, we didn't go to the gym much in our youth anyway, and weights were a really weird thing to consider. I mean, you know, weights in the 80s. But it does seem to be coming back into the culture, and it can only be a good thing because, like you say, it's character building, and it does change, I think, the mentality. A very good person on this is Raw Egg Nationalist. He goes by that, whoever he is, goes by that name, and he's on Twitter and Telegram and all sorts. And I highly recommend anyone.
I'll just have a look. Yeah, I think you're right with that. With the training, I mean, I was sort of growing up in the 80s as well, and it was very much seen as a bit of a niche kind of sport, I think, until we had then Arnie and Stallone, and so on. And I think they kind of popularised it, made it a little bit more accessible. But what's encouraging now, I think, is when I do go to the gym and lift weights, you know, there are a lot of teenagers down there. They're training properly, they're training hard, they're into what they're doing. And I think that's very encouraging. You know, it's good to see. Yeah.
My 16-year-old son has started it, and it's great. Nowadays, you do 20 press-ups and a run around the courtyard or something, and in your plimsolls, and that was considered enough activity, I think.
Or you're out anyway on the bikes and climbing trees and building dens and running around like that, weren't you? So it's you kind of got exercise that way. But
it's good that it's coming back. It was a great passage. It's a slightly long one, but I'm going to read all of it because it really is perfect for the letting people know what the book's about, really. He's having doubts. He's had problems in bed with his wife. He's getting fretful as the big date arrives, and he's wondering whether he should just bottle it and get out or not. And he comes to this is the passage where he comes to the conclusion. Frankie had seen it with several of his lads. It had happened to Frankie too back in his early days. He'd see trouble coming, see the signs of it building. There'd be the belligerent drunk making a nuisance of himself, stumbling around and pissing everyone off, just as likely to be the victim of violence as the perpetrator. Toxic couple playing out their private drama in public, needling each other, winding each other up, the verbal abuse inevitably moving to the physical. The violent thug daring someone to hold his gaze for a moment too long, to bump his shoulder, to laugh at the wrong moment, anything for an excuse to kick off. Frankie would see it all, could recognise the story and the characters, knew what was going to happen before the action took place. And then it would reach a certain point where he knew that it was time to get involved, knew that he had to take action and get in there quick if he wanted to nip trouble in the bud. But he didn't. Instead, he waited. He watched as even more of the drama played out, because a part of him was hoping for the best to happen, for the situation to somehow resolve itself, for the troublemakers to get bored or leave of their own accord, for it all to go away. On that occasion, for whatever reason, he just didn't want the trouble. He didn't want the strife. But he'd learned that the best never happened, that the trouble never really went away on its own. And this thing with Warren was just a further confirmation of the facts, that you always had to take action. That's superb. Superb writing, well done.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And it's very red-pilled in that sense, like you were going back to earlier. It's not political at all, but that is not a liberal stand. That is not the position of anyone who's not as red-pilled as they can be, because we understand that ultimately the buck stops with us, that we are responsible. Things never really get better on their own. There's lots of bad guys out there, and you know, wishful thinking isn't going to get you anywhere.
Yeah, so, yeah. That's I think that's perhaps a reality that people don't really want to accept anymore now.
Very much. I mean, and they've been doing it for now 30, 40 years, so now we're living with the consequences of planes that don't fly, drugs that kill you, you know, because it's all just happy, clappy thought thinking.
Yeah. Well, is it as well to perhaps do with, if you think about that kind of concept, and I think there's something that I wanted to put across in Muscle, is that Frankie's a capable, competent individual. So you think we've perhaps lost some of that competence, and that's why we are where we are.
The term they're using these days is the competency crisis. I think I first saw it about a month ago, but yeah, no doubt about it. And it's not surprising really when we promote people on any basis but their abilities. Yeah. I mean, what do you expect? Sadly. But yeah, it's all there. It's all in this small little novella. Highly recommend anyone get out there and buy it. It's an easy read, and it'll keep hitting you as you read it with punches of its own. You say you're a poet. Tell us a bit about your poetry.
I think that's just something that I tend to just dabble in here and there. I found poetry to be quite useful when it comes to writing novellas, just to have that very straightforward style, and just to conjure up the imagery and perhaps the tones or the themes in as succinct and leaner style as possible. So I've not published any poetry at all. It's very much just apart from some online magazines.
And what do you write about? What's the focus of your poetry, or the style?
I'd probably describe them as, I suppose, almost anglicised haikus. You know, very short snapshots of life. You know, of an instant, of a thought, of a feeling. So, no sort of sweeping epics like Samuel Coleridge or anybody like that. You know, just these little snippets.
Right, that sounds very good. By the way, before we move on from your novel, I thought the cover is excellent. Did you get that professionally? It shows a man's bandaged hand after a fight with blood on it.
Yes, I think I've got.
Yeah, show it. Did you pay for that, or?
No. So there you go. There's the cover there. So no, this was. I did this one myself using Canva.
That's a program, is it?
Yeah, so it's a sort of design platform where you can get various templates on there, for all sorts of things, free imagery, social media posts. It's I suppose like a more basic version of, say, Photoshop. I'm very much a Luddite when it comes to technology.
Yeah.
You know, it's a miracle that we're on this call at the minute. It's actually working. I'm very much a kind of a pen and paper person, or just basic Word when it comes to writing things anyway. So I sort of muddled through this cover using just some of the tools on there. So I'd recommend it if as an alternative to perhaps in for a cover. I sound like a Canva affiliate now, don't I? Like I'm sort of making things fun. Yeah, I'll definitely have a look for that. If anybody's self-publishing and looking for a cover, have a look at that tool.
You are self-published. I didn't check, but I presume you are. But did you try and flog it to the publishers?
No. I suppose I've always wanted to write, and I've always wanted to be published. And I think the original idea, perhaps much like many people, is to go down that traditional publishing route. And it was just something that I never really followed up. And it wasn't until 2020 when I decided, and we're into the pandemic and so on. And that was when I decided to sort of pull the trigger, if you like, and actually publish something.
Right.
So I just went directly to the self-published route via Kindle, because it seemed like a decent model in terms of no cost, on demand. So I didn't even attempt to send it in to anybody. I didn't really think it'd be interesting.
If you don't want that kind of story with that kind of content, but I do feel it's got a great potential as a film, and I don't know how you'd even start with that. But the great thing about it is it could be done on a low budget. It doesn't have he doesn't travel around the world in jets or anything, and it's very tightly focused on 4 characters, and it could almost be done by a bunch of mates, over successive weekends. And I would love to see that personally. It has a little bit of what was the Michael Caine film where he goes to Newcastle and gets
Get Carter.
Get Carter. It has a bit of a feel of that to it, and
thank you.
That was similar to the film. It wasn't high budget. I think he just dressed him up properly, and anyway, I really would. I could see it doing that, and from there, you never know, you get your publishing deal. But of course, everything's a bit tricky these days. You might have to change the characters.
And it's funny you should say that on 2 things there. One, Ted Lewis, who wrote the original novel for Get Carter, is a real inspiration for me and an influence. Anyway,
okay.
I love some of his. Have you read many of his novels?
I've read Get Carter, and I do remember sort of highlighting the guy as someone to watch and read where possible. Yes,
I definitely recommend GBH and Plender if you can. They're freely available now on Amazon. They've been reissued. So it's funny you should say that. And also on another note, I've actually started adapting Muscle into a screenplay. So there are. Obviously, I'm not going to show my scruffy writing on there, but I've just been doing a lot of it handwritten at the moment, just to get the first draft done. I know you mentioned there, not entirely sure what I'll do with it afterwards. I'll at least try and send it across to pieces to get it done.
Figure it out. I'm very encouraged by that. I do think it's got legs.
Thank you.
And as I say, I don't think it would be that difficult for somebody to pick up a small independent group and to make something really good of it without breaking the bank or anything, or running too much risk.
There's limited characters. There are not many locations.
No.
As such.
I can see it winning a prize at one of these indie film festivals in a few years. Let's see.
Oh, thank you. You're too kind. You're very, very kind. Very kind.
Now, tell us about in your blurb. There's something about you writing a novel.
Yes. Yeah.
Let's hear about it.
So the novels were, I have to say, I've put that to one side at the moment. So I think I probably need to update that blurb, to be honest with you. I think I wrote that one quite some time ago. I don't know if this is something that you've experienced yourself, but I've probably gone through that little bit of the kind of second novel problems.
Tell me about it. Yeah.
So I've had various false starts. I've probably written since Muscle was published. I've probably written at least 2 novels worth of various drafts that just go nowhere, that you get so far into, then you kind of read back and think, oh, that's too flat, that's not really connecting. So that's an ongoing thing at the moment. Funnily enough, although I thought I was finished with Muscle and the characters, obviously I've started to adapt it now as a screenplay, but I've also got an idea for a follow-up to the novella, and that may well be the project that replaces this novel that I've mentioned in the blurb. So yeah, that's cooking along at the moment, just in the back of my head at the moment.
Same sort of setting and context. And
yeah, it's a direct follow-up to Muscle that would be looking at the aftermath of what happens in the novella and following several of the characters in that aftermath and the decisions that they make as a result of what happened in the novella.
My mind boggles at the thought. That's a very interesting prospect.
Yeah, so a kind of direct. It would, at the moment, it would take place pretty much immediately after the final scene in Muscle, and would then just move on from there.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would say in terms of your writing style and the evidence I have of it so far is if that book had been 250 pages instead of 100, I would have been happier. You know, I'm not criticizing the length, because it works perfectly as it is. But you write such great little passages and with insights and stuff that the more of it, the merrier, as far as I'm concerned. And I do think if that had been stretched out over...
My head's going to expand beyond the content of this Skype screen soon, Richard. You keep saying all these kind of things.
Well, I mean it. Any other books in line, or is that the one at the moment?
There's a couple,
especially in other genres. I'm thinking, are you going to draw on your military background or anything like that at some point?
Yeah, there might well be one that's what's going to draw on my military background and probably be set in a similar world as Muscle, and probably try and mix the kind of military thriller with a kitchen sink drama almost, and that crime drama. So I think my background was my specialty in the military was as an interrogator, and there's a lot of misconceptions about what an interrogator does, and a lot of that is because a lot of what it does isn't necessarily as filmic, and some of the misconceptions are a lot more cinematic and create a lot more drama. But I think I'd like to write something perhaps looking at an interrogator as a character and then try and mix that in with a crime story.
Yeah,
I've got a couple of ideas at the moment. We'll have to just see where that kind of pans out in the future.
Oh, good. Well, we'll be watching closely.
Yeah.
Were there any writers that influenced you along the way? Do you draw on? You mentioned Ted Willis. Ted Willis, isn't it? Yeah.
Ted Lewis. Yeah.
Lewis. Sorry. He is terrific. Anybody else that sort of?
Oh, there's several throughout, probably throughout the kind of 80s and 90s. Jack Higgins.
Yeah.
Wilbur Smith, Clive Cussler. Clive Barker, who's writing horror, more than Stephen King, Sean Hudson. There's countless writers. The ones that probably the most influential were writers like Ted Lewis, who combined that kind of kitchen sink grittiness almost with this kind of this really dark and nasty crime stories. These stories weren't set in exotic locations. They were kind of set in Humberside and places like that. They were set around the corner.
State,
Richard Stark, some of his Parker novels.
Oh, outstanding! My favourite.
Yeah. Fantastic. Really, and so. I mean, the amount that he packed into 150 pages. Very slim novels, but fantastic series. The Parker novels. I got into them back in the. I imagine it would have been probably early to mid 90s when they kind of, there was this sort of renaissance of crime fiction at the time,
Yeah.
And I think it come off the back of films like Reservoir Dogs and so on. But they reissued a lot of Ted Lewis books, reissued all the Parker novels. You know,
Yeah.
really good time for crime fiction. So he was absolutely an influence. And then an author called Tim Willocks.
Yeah, Green River Rising.
Yes, yeah. Fantastic novel. That's absolutely and I think it's one of those novels too that had its own sort of themes and messages that it wanted to put on. I think that's a very red-pilled book in many ways, as well in some of the characters and their attitudes. You know, really, really good novel.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it's been a bit of a mix of all those things.
And that's very common. I don't say that as a criticism, but there's nobody writing today that you can sort of point to, is there, that sort of inspires, or it's just a big empty void of nothingness.
Yeah, not in the ways that those guys did. Much like I think I took a lot of other influences from a lot of the British drama that was on television in the 80s. I don't know if you sort of remember there was a lot of single dramas that used to be on BBC. Play on One, Play for Today, Screen One, those kind of series. Yeah. So you'd have these kind of one-off dramas that would touch on a range of subjects and characters. And I think a lot of that high point of good, solid British drama as well was very much an influence. You know, the films by Alan Clark, you know, films like Scott, Made in Britain, The Firm, things like that. You know, fantastic time for it. And there's not really much that has that kind of impact today, I don't think.
We got Big Brother and Celebrities in the Jungle instead, aren't we lucky?
Yeah.
Speaking of this, then, you live in the north of England. You know, in a short version, but where do you see Britain at the moment? What's going on? Where is it heading?
God.
Why haven't you left yet?
God. I think we are heading for I think we're hitting that sort of point of almost like a kind of a turning point. I think, you know,
point of no return.
Yeah, I think we're hitting that point, and we're hitting the point where that pendulum's maybe just starting to swing back again, perhaps. It's hard to not sound negative or pessimistic about it, but I sometimes, you know, I look around and it's easy to get drawn into it. I think when you look at Twitter and you look at the news, and it's easy to be quite demoralised by it all. But when you actually get out and speak to people, you'll find that the vast majority of people are quite normal, sensible, sane. So there's still hope, I think. is what I'm saying there.
I'm a long-term optimist, but I'm
but I think we're going to have some pain short term. I think, unfortunately, I do think it's going to be a bit of pain short term.
Are you eligible to be called up again if things go tits up on the or something like that? Yeah,
only if things are so bad now. I think I'm really at the bottom of the list now with my sort of my reserve commitment now. It's you know, things have really gone wrong if I get called up. You know, that's it.
We'll be watching to see what. Yeah. Oh dear.
Yeah. You know, you get the annual reporting letter every year as an ex-serviceman where they just ask you to update your details to, you know, so they can find you if that event happens. But yeah, it would be the wheels have seriously come off if I get called up again, I think, at that point.
Well, let's hope not, because we need you to carry on writing.
Yes, that'd be nice. nice to have that opportunity to keep doing that.
Maybe you'll be writing from some gulag somewhere. Anyway, it's been a real pleasure. Reading the book was a real pleasure. I do recommend it to all listeners. I mean, get out and buy this one. How much are you charging for it?
I think I've got it at £3.99 for paperback and 99p for ebook.
Absolute steal. That's as good as free in my mind, and well worth it. We look forward to seeing a sequel. I won't go into too much about the sequel because I don't want to spoil the ending of the first one. But I'm certain it will be as good as the first. So let's hope so.
Right.
And we wish you all the best in that. And thanks for coming on the show.
Right. Thank you very much. It's been great.
All right. Cheers.
Bye.